Now I am. So I'd like to call the meeting to order at 9:04 a.m. I would like to ask that, as a courtesy to all, please ensure that you've silenced your cell phones. Each director has received notice of this committee meeting. The public meeting notice was properly posted as required by law. Directors Mike Fernandez and John Henry Luton indicated they would not be present for this meeting. At this point of the meeting, we have set aside time to hear from you, the general public. Those of you that were interested in providing comments and filled out one of the cards available at the reception's desk will be called to make your comments at this time. And we have no public comments this morning. So seeing that no one wishes to speak, we'd like to move forward on the first agenda item. Report and possible discussion on property evaluation update. Blake Kettler, Technical Services Manager. Good morning, Blake.
Good morning. So everybody loves it when their slideshow gets hijacked. So the last property management committee meeting, we came to the committee and we talked about bringing in an expert to help us accomplish something. We listened to the committee and the concerns, and we went back to the drawing board. And basically, the approach that you're fixing to hear is based on the BRA acknowledging that nobody knows our properties and our goals and our futures better than our staff. So we very well may bring in an expert at some point in time to help us look at a particular piece of property or an airport or a this or a that. But at this point, with the blessing of the past chair, we've developed a methodology for evaluating these projects, these properties, and some matrix that we can look at and bring the board these properties and basically control our own future. We will benefit from identifying each of these properties and how these properties fit in the portfolio of the BRA's assets. But we are not in we're not in a hurry to do that. We want to do it. We do want to do it somewhat expeditiously, but we want at the end of the day for our board to be comfortable with the properties that we have and the intended uses of those properties, because if we divest of a property, we'll never get it back. So again, Blake and Tiffany are going to walk you through this methodology and show you what the future looks like of the interaction between the staff and the property management committee, and then ultimately the board as we assess our assess our properties. Sorry, Blake.
All right, thank you, David. Yes, good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. With this agenda item, like David stated, we're going to walk you through what we've structured as far as our internal property evaluation process and solicit feedback, see if you guys have any input on that. So just to kind of bring you up to speed, because there is quite a bit of extensive history with this initiative. We began this back in 2021 when staff and the Property Management Committee identified the need for understanding our property holdings and determining what highest and best use was for alignment with BRA's mission statement and our strategic plan. We went out and pursued this initiative under an overall encompassing property master plan approach, and this was with half associates. Phase one was to develop the property management database and organize BRA's current property holdings information to improve efficiency from this standpoint.
And let me assure the committee, and this is the last time I'll interrupt you, Blake, the database that you approved us to create and the money that we spent has been some of the best money the BRA has spent. We use that database on a daily basis to assess the properties that we have. And for other things.
Yes, sir. Yes, that's true. In 2022, we completed the property management database. That's been a very useful tool. An example of this, for us to kind of put together how much property we had at PK, basically we'd have to go back through and look at files and everything and add that up. Sandra was able to get me that information within 5 minutes or so. It was really efficient from that standpoint. So at completion of phase one, the additional phases of the property master plan were put on hold to address some low-hanging fruit properties, some things that were just that were ongoing that needed to be addressed quicker than we could get through the evaluation process. That process is now coming to an end, and BRA staff still recognizes the need for guidance on highest and best use of our properties. So we approached, as David said, the committee in late 2023 with this concept to re-engage for those additional phases of the property master plan. While that was acceptable to the committee, and we appreciate your everyone giving us the okay on that, we did understand the constraints as far as timing and budget. In order to meet those expectations, we adjusted course and have begun structuring and implementing an internal evaluation process that we're going to brief you on here. So this is going to be more of a systematic process where we feel we can make progress in a way that does not overwhelm our staff from a resource perspective, but meets the expectations from those timing and budget considerations. The new evaluation process considers many of the same factors as previously considered. So an example of those could be anything from operational necessity or easements, encumbrances, flooding considerations, water quality, species of concern, things like that. What we're proposing to perform is a two-part internal evaluation of properties on an individual basis using an evaluation tool that Tiffany and her staff have put together to help grade properties on those mentioned factors and the associated, and I guess also do a property document review. So looking at our deeds, restrictions, things like that. Are there any gotchas or risks in there as far as buyback clauses, or the adjacent property owner has a right to cross the property to graze cattle, things like that. So making sure we understand what's all in those documents. Ultimately, arriving at a score based out of Tiffany's evaluation matrix and that property or that document review to help us in making a recommendation to the committee from BRA staff perspective what the highest and best use of that property would be. With that in mind, we understand that we do not set policy as BRA staff, so when presented to the committee and to the board, it would be purely a recommendation from a BRA staff perspective. We'd still rely on you guys to provide that policy input and ultimately determine what the path forward is for that piece of property. One other thing to mention before I get into this map, we also are actively pursuing external support for an IDIQ contract. This is in addition to, I guess, further our resource pool. So we have our internal resource that know our property the best. We can lean on this IDIQ contract in case there are things that kind of fell out of our area of expertise. If we need an appraisal or something like that, we could quickly write a service order under that contract. I'm sorry? The limit of that contract is $250,000 overall over a 5-year period, $25,000 service order. So basically up to a $25,000 service order. So we could write an appraisal for $2,000-$3,000, whatever it took to get us to appraise that property. But it's just another tool to help support us from both the timing and efficiency standpoint, and also from a budget perspective. So this evaluation,
Blake, excuse me.
Yes, sir.
Go ahead.
What is, show me ignorance, what is you said IDIQ?
Yes, sir. I'm sorry. Indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity. It's a type of contract where we can write service orders against based off of a certain set of scope items.
Thank you very much.
Yes, sir. So this evaluation process will kick it off at Possum Kingdom, where we hold, like I said, majority of our property, roughly 11,000 acres. I think we've done the math, and it might be a little more in excess of that, but on 386 tracts. So the map here, you can see there's a lot of property up there spread from the north reaches up on more of the river portion all the way down towards the dam. And these can range in 100+ acre tracts down to little undeveloped strips that might be an 1/8 or 1/16 of an acre. So they vary quite a bit in size. I think how we ended up in this situation, so if you look at how we pursued reservoirs over the history of BRA, we became more refined with our process. When we first acquired properties up there at PK, first reservoir built, it wasn't necessarily just looking at the footprint of the dam, but it might have been negotiations with the property owner. If you're going to take my 50 acres near the river bottom, then we want you to purchase our 100 acres up top. And so we ended up with all these odd and end tracks outside the footprint of the dam. That approach gets a little more refined as you get to Granbury and Limestone. So this process here, the heavy lifting is going to be at PK, but we'll work through other areas of the basin. With that amount of property, though, the plan is to take this in manageable chunks. So what we're looking at doing on how to wrap our mind around all this property up there, we're going to start the evaluation process with 100+ acre tracts. We had looked at some different, some different size tracts, 50+ acres. We were at like 60 some odd different tracts. So we're like, okay, well, let's look at 100+ acre tracts. To kind of get our feet wet, understand how the scoring matrix, all that falls out. And there's about 34, 35 tracks there. So the approach is to look at those and start on the north end and work our way south on the reservoir. We would evaluate a handful at a time, and of course, a handful at a time. It may be 5, 6, 7, 8 different tracks, and then bring those to the committee and say, hey, here's our recommendation. Do you guys agree with it or not agree with it? Let's, come to a resolution on where those properties fall out moving forward. So once we work through the 100 acre tracts, continue to dial it down, 50+ acre tracts, 25, all the way down to those undeveloped strips. And ultimately coming to a standpoint that we can reasonably say that we've evaluated all the properties there at PK and then move to other locations.
The goal of this process and the goal of this committee was to never divest of properties. It is to evaluate and identify the need for our properties in the future. So those that may be watching on YouTube or those that are new to the committee, the goal is not to divest a property, it's to assess the properties.
So here's a map of those initial tracks that we've currently highlighted would be the first to go through this evaluation process. This area is up on the upper reaches of Possum Kingdom as highlighted here. I think you can see just south of the city of Graham there. These are the northernmost 100+ acre tracts in BRA's possession. So these would be the first that we kind of go through and look at and evaluate from those standpoints, from the scoring tool that Tiffany's group put together, and also Sandra from our property administrator looking at the documents and everything associated with the property. So Tiffany, I'll hand it over to you if you want to bring them through the scoring matrix.
Hi, can you go to the next slide, please? Came up that there's going to be 3 pages of this with different items that could indicate some future strategic value to BRA, or if nothing else, hopefully prevent us from selling property into something that becomes a long-term headache and time-consuming effort for us. So the first one is the 100-year floodplain. Is the property in the 100-year floodplain? That has implications for human health and safety, property damage, things like that, for issues we can't control, and that is probably going to be most applicable on those upstream sites that are not on the reservoir proper. Next, water quality considerations. Undeveloped property provides us a lot of water quality benefits to our reservoirs. So the length of the buffer zone, how intact it is, the wider it is, the more filtration, the more capturing of pollutants up on the land before it gets to the water we'll experience. Wetlands, how much of it is a certified wetland. We use the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service's National Wetland Inventory to make this determination. Since there is no regional sewerage system out there, and honestly just the shape of the lake makes that somewhat tricky in of itself, how suitable are those soils for accepting septic tanks? And that is a USDA and RCS county-specific soil surveys they do. So we've looked at their soil assessments for the affected counties where these properties are. Next, just general wildlife habitat and value. Looking for either the property itself is greater than 30 acres or is contiguous with other BRA properties that can create some good wildlife habitat and corridors. not knowing what sort of species and habitat issues we're going to have to contend with in the future, those larger blocks could potentially be valuable to BRA in the future if we needed mitigation land or conservation land. Looked at species considerations for species we know that are either state or federally listed and protected. This would have to change when we go to Granbury or to limestone. So some of these can be tweaked and customized to fit the area we're working in. So Brazos water snake, we looked at, do we know that it occupies that area? Does it have good habitat present? Does the slope of the property make it a potential where if this ever does become a federally protected species, that if we need conservation where we could maybe create property, or that there's just no habitat? Once you're down into the lake, there's a lot of very steep properties where there's just nothing we could do for it. Small eye and sharp-nosed shiners, where U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has designated critical habitat that pretty much runs that stretch of the river Blake just showed you with those initial 6 properties on it. And during the 2011 drought, when the lake got really low and that upper portion of the lake became more riverine, researchers found that those 2 shiners were using that part of the reservoir as a refuge. Once we get down into the main body of the lake, it is not appropriate habitat for them and of no value. Looking at, do we currently have parks, trails, wildlife watching opportunities out there, recreational opportunities, or does it have potential for development? Again, depending on kind of the slope of the property and how usable it is, we've made that determination. Finally, looked at other options, current use of the property. Is it used for BRA operations? And we certainly don't want to accidentally put it on the sale block because we're actively using it for a beneficial purpose, or undeveloped. Does it already have public use activities on it? There's a lot of oil and gas well sites around that could potentially be problematic. Does it currently have roads going through it, or is it fully developed? And then finally, the OSS oversight. Our designation from the state of Texas to oversee septic tanks around that lake extends for about 2,000 linear feet from the 1,000-foot contour. So if a lot of these properties start getting sold and getting developed with septic tanks on them for residential properties, that's going to create our operational expense. We'll probably have to have more inspectors. So just looking at that operational impact on the PK Lake staff. And I am open for suggestions. We can take things out. We can change weightings. But so far, it seems to work. I've done some testing on various size properties, and it seems to be giving answers that reasonably pass the sniff test. I'd like to do a little bit more testing with it, but so far it seems to be doing a pretty good job at identifying properties which should be valuable to us.
Tiffany, we have a question.
Yes,
Tiffany, you said you've had an opportunity to test this at other sites. How long does it take you to do that?
I haven't done it at other sites, but I've done smaller blocks of properties. What we're showing you here are just some of those 100-acre plus blocks. So I've done some 25-acre properties and working on getting some 10. It is a fairly time-consuming process, to be honest with you. I have multiple layers in ArcGIS format, and it takes some time to go in and look individually. Some of these, like the riparian depth, has to be manually measured. I'm taking 5 width measurements across the property. So I can get in a pretty good groove if I can get time uninterrupted and bang them out, but it is somewhat time consuming.
So I like that we're doing all of this in-house. I believe that your expertise and the rest of the team that knows the properties will give us the best data. What does this do to the size of team that you have? Do you foresee additional staff to help? What are you anticipating as we go through this process? Because this is just PK. We're talking.
This is a much more efficient process than me trying to send my team of biologists out, to look for eagles' nests and everything else. So right now, I don't think we will need to add anyone. It's probably something as we get it kind of towards its final, I might reach out to the IT department to see if their GIS expert has any ideas on how to maybe automate some of the analyses. But right now, I don't foresee with Blake's measured approach of doing a certain number of properties every quarter or so, I don't really see the need to bring anyone else on board.
Okay, thank you. Tiffany, go ahead.
So I just wanted to understand, the weighting factor you've got, from 3.5 to 3.9, and that would be the value essentially to the BRA for the potential use under any of these, whether it's for remediation or I wanted to just understand exactly what the total number is because you got different weightings.
Right.
Those weightings are based just on my professional opinion of what is most likely to either give us benefit or cause us problems.
Okay.
So I am open for suggestions for revision.
So what does your final score show? Is that where you're going to?
Yeah. All right. So, okay. I like it. I don't have any problem, but so now we've got this range.
Max possible range is 5. It can go from 0 to 5. So 3.5, that's something as we go through this at some point in time, that's just going to be kind of our recommendation of that property's value. I can tell you when I got to some of those smaller ones, we're seeing some 1s and some 2s where they don't have a whole lot of potential future value for us.
So it's more of a value than a risk. Okay. That's what I was trying to understand. Is it a risk or is it a benefit?
It's a combination of both. Some of these are risks and some of these are benefits.
Yeah.
So Tiffany, let me play on that just a tad bit. So you have 6 properties listed here.
Mm-hmm.
And when you look at the ranking system in your mind, just as a sniff test, common sense, did the weights align correctly as you would have expected, or was there a surprise? And you don't necessarily have to answer that in explanation other than that then validates if your percentages by the topic matches, right? So I think that's maybe the question.
And for these properties, no, I did not get any surprises. The only one, but this is not necessarily going to be the final answer because this property up here really provides very little benefit to the lake itself, but it's in the floodplain. It's got some nice habitat. That's one that if there was a way as part of the Graham flood control project up there, if we could deed that to the city of Graham for addition to their existing parks and trail systems and no future residential or commercial development on it, that one doesn't, even though it ranked well because of what it does for the environment, it doesn't necessarily provide us a good strategic value.
Yeah, so let me offer up maybe just a comment to think about. So the scoring metric is a great way to rank this. I think it's important for the board to understand the details of how you're doing this, like what you're showing. Maybe just a suggestion would be that as you're bringing some recommendations to the board, the committee and the board, maybe think about pulling it back from a strategic and summarizing what the weight is, and then maybe breaking out the matrix of listing out like what you just verbally did on here are the risks of this piece of property, here are the opportunities for this piece of property. If there's any type of percentage that you might want to apply to that risk or opportunity that you think that might happen, and then maybe if you think it warrants what that financial impact looks like. And then I think maybe that gives us, to Director Savage's point, a better understanding of what the weight means versus risk and opportunities.
Yeah.
Director Lattimore?
I think as far as this goes, that it's a great evaluation. I've got a couple of questions one of them involves your mention of the oil and gas. If I remember right, the General Land Office controls the mineral interests on all the properties that the BRA
I
owns.
don't think it's all of them, it's most of them. I think BRA has some down on the
Well,
lower portion.
my question is, does that impact the surface rights? And maybe my question is too complicated, but
That's a great
I
question.
don't know what,
So that's a really good question, and I didn't think to go back and look at what surface agreements we have. I remember when those came about. Yeah. Jump in.
Director Lattimore, yes, that'll be part of that evaluation process. We're going to look at all those surface agreements, and like Director LaChance said, when we come back, we'll have kind of the bullets. Hey, here's your risks. Here's the opportunities. Yes, there is a something in place as far as a surface agreement or not, and what that looks like.
So where would that fit into these evaluations?
Right now,
There.
yeah, current use of property, and I just was visually looking at the aerial photos to see I did not go to that level. That's something we can leave in, take out, or I can refine my numbering and make 3 an oil and gas site with a surface use agreement in place versus a 2 as one without any surface use limitations on it.
yeah. Well, and my point is, kind of leads me to the next question. It may be that a particular piece of property would have no utility if it's locked up because of the mineral situation. Now, the second part of my question is, and maybe it's the second step in this evaluation. It seems to me that part of our evaluation ought to be an evaluation of the utility of the property. For instance, if you take the Graham property that you pointed out, that far northern property, it would have no development potential, first of all, because it's in the floodplain. But if you compare the depth versus the width of the property, it really would have no development potential, where some of the other properties that you mentioned would have a depth to width property ratio that might make them ultimately very developable, if you follow what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And to me, the geometry of the property at some point has to enter into this evaluation matrix and show up as a factor that we would evaluate as a committee.
And
Does that make sense?
It does. We have the highest number is the entire properties in the 100-year floodplain.
Correct.
Then I drop down half the properties in the 100-year floodplain, and that's certainly one of those policy decisions, that you can make less than half the property or none of the property.
Well, and I understand the floodplain issue, but I'm talking more about the geometry of the property. If you consider a piece that is primarily just along the river frontage, but very shallow in depth and would present no real development potential, that's one kind of property. But if it's a piece that offers real development potential, and I'm thinking about a piece that we recently divested down on Granbury, and I happened to fly over it the other day, and I don't want to bore this committee with the details, but we divested that piece of property, and I flew over it, and the gentleman is developing a really nice golf course on this piece of property that we sold. He represented to us that it was surplus. But what I'm talking about is, it seems to me that the work you've done is really great, but at some point, you got to cover the geometry of the property in that evaluation. Does that make sense?
It does.
That'll be a big deal once we get into the smaller tracks, because we do own so many. You've heard our staff refer to them as slivers of land that are going to be really challenging to deal with. But the point that you're making, it helps address that.
Well, in these larger tracts too, I mean,
Right.
I'm an old real estate developer, and the geometry would be very important to me. Thank you very much. Good job.
Director Bourne.
This question may be more at David. Is it possible, the possibility, since of its contiguous nature by the lake, these properties might have groundwater potential for harvesting before we're so quick to divest, if there was such a word as divest, because I'm hoping it's not our intent necessarily. It depends on lots of issues there. And as far as developing, a developer can take anything and develop anything, even a 100-year floodplain. I've seen that happen. So I'm just wondering, being so close to the lake for hundreds of years, is the groundwater, is that a potential, for lack of a word I use, storage that we're just not tapping right now that we should be looking at before because we've done it on other properties.
I can maybe provide a little bit of insight on that, and we can certainly do some more homework into that for the next meeting, but most of that area is the Trinity Aquifer, and it is pretty brackish up there. In fact, extremely brackish, which is why you're seeing such a proliferation of RO discharges along the river through there. So I think it would be limited because anything that's going to filter in from the lake would also have that higher saline value. And then the Trinity Aquifer itself, which up there is very brackish.
We'll have that
an
answer.
opinion,
Director Bourne, that's a
you
good
don't know
question.
for sure.
Yep.
We'll evaluate that. Yeah,
Okay.
appreciate it.
Any further questions, comments? I'm assuming this is all housed within the database. Is that where we're going to keep all this information?
Yes, ma'am. So when I was going to just wrap it up, I was going to let you know. Thank you, Tiffany.
Thank you, Tiffany.
Just to close this out here. So yes, all the information that we capture here, that will be uploaded into the database to make sure that that's there for current staff, future staff to reference. This again, if we appreciate all the input, the feedback. If you think of anything else, please feel free to reach out to David, and we'll make sure to consider that.
Yeah, Blake, I don't want to lose it on the committee, lose the fact that that's a great win for BRA that you've completed the database. It has, it is a big win for us. And, maybe just a brief comment would be that there's a lot of things that I'm sure the GIS and plats and surface agreements and all that you can pull together and you have a document that you're pulling, which is one thing. But it would, to me, just continue to message to the staff that there's things that each of them probably know because they've been to the site or they've dealt with the property or whatever, that it's some of that knowledge that is not in a document. And that's the whole purpose of that database. So we can get what's here in there. So other people, and we just have, it gives us a better deck and
Yes,
to
ma'am.
make better decisions.
Yep.
So great job.
One thing that that we've been looking at is if you go into the database right now, we have all of our operational areas are cross-hatched in a certain color. Depending the outcome here, we've thrown around the idea of cross-hatching different things in colors. We've gotten direction from the Property Management Committee. This was the meeting, and here's all the documentation that went
Perfect.
into that. So
Great. Director Savage.
I just had one comment. I've been reading, and I was at the TPPF last week, and there was a session on AI. This database seems like it within the Brazos River Authority might be the place to kind of experiment with AI, because you could go query that, and now that it's all digitally in there, and get this information so much faster with any kind of a question, about, okay, there's been a determination on the Brazos water snake. Where's the best place we would have in the system to create habitat? And that might be, a place where we might want to stick a toe in the water with AI.
okay, thank you for the feedback.
Anything further on this?
That's it on my end. Thank you.
Okay, so our next agenda item is discussion and possible action on B Mountain Properties presented by Blake Kettler, Technical Services Manager.
All right. Sorry about that. Was jogging through my notes. Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. With this agenda item, we will provide a recommendation to the committee regarding the future use of the B Mountain properties. So as some of you may recall, there's been quite a few agenda items on the B Mountain properties over the years, but to bring those that are not familiar up to speed, the B Mountain properties have been in BRA's ownership since the 1950s. There's quite a bit of history there, and I'll try to hit some of the highlights. But back in the 1950s, B Mountain was a proposed reservoir site in Somerville, Johnson, and Bosque counties. You can see it right down here. This was proposed to be and it was part of the 6-dam program. Let me back up for just a sec. The 6-dam program, this was proposed to be stair-stepping reservoirs, kind of similar to the Highland Lakes in the lower Colorado Basin. Out of the 6-dam program, only PK and Granbury ever came to fruition. None of the other reservoirs were pursued. In the 1950s, while out acquiring property and easements for B Mountain, the BRA ran into the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers doing the same for Lake Whitney. The vicinity of Lake Whitney and B Mountain is pretty close, and actually there's areas, I guess, where Lake Whitney, the elevation backs up almost to B Mountain. With that, BRA digressed, and we entered into an agreement with the Corps. This agreement and the associated terms was amended multiple times over the years, which extended up to 1962. This is important because after multiple amendments of the property acquisition agreement with the Corps, they refused their option to acquire the properties from the BRA, which ultimately left them in our possession. During that time frame, BRA acquired 57 tracts totaling approximately 1,200 acres along the Brazos River. Some properties were outright purchased while others condemned. Over the years, many of these tracts have been reconveyed to the original heirs, while we have retained flowage easements to certain meets and bounds. These reconveyance activities lasted up until the late 1990s, early 2000s. The Corps also have flowage easements in this area in order to permanently inundate to the 533 elevation, which is the normal operating pool for Lake Whitney, and occasionally inundate to the 573 as part of flood ops in that area. Currently, BRA retains 324 acres and 19 tracts in that area. And over the years, we've received several inquiries for folks looking at purchasing these different tracts. Generally, our response has been that these will be evaluated as part of a larger property management initiative, which was in this case. With that in mind, we determined internally to evaluate the properties based on factors such as operational necessity, flooding, water quality, species consideration, some of those things that we talked about in the last agenda item, and ultimately have come to the conclusion that these properties do serve an important environmental purpose for the BRA, and it's in our best interest for BRA to retain ownership of the B Mountain tracts. These properties provide water quality protection buffer zone and potential conservation opportunities. Tiffany, I don't know, would you like to come up and kind of talk through what your staff went through as far as the evaluation, the findings, all that type of stuff?
For these properties, since they're all relatively close together, they're relatively shallow in depth and easily navigatable by kayak, we actually put boots on the ground to look at all of these. I don't think that'd be feasible at PK, but for this one, we got them out there. They said it was, without a doubt, some of the most pristine, untouched riparian vegetation they've seen in the basin. They felt it gave a very good filtration rate for us because most of the properties have not been grazed. They've just been left undisturbed. They thought there were maybe some potential if we needed conservation lands in the future that we could use those. Not every property, they said some we could make some Brazos water snake habitat. They also searched the river for mussels. They did not find any living mussels, but found recently dead shells indicating that there are some there, which after last summer's drought, which is when they're out, that's not a surprising result. The river was pretty shallow and pretty hot. So they felt that was some of the prettiest, nicest riparian that we've seen. And it's mainly because BRA's owned it for so long. They thought it would be a a detriment to the river if that were destroyed, but that was their biological opinion. But we put all 6 aquatic scientists out there, and they went up and down the lake or the river there and looked at every one of them.
Thank you, Tiffany. So I guess with that, we'd like to make the recommendation that BRA retains these properties for those future purposes. There is one property that is an exception to this. We're currently in discussions with that property owner. They've got some unique circumstances, and we'll bring that in a near future committee and board meeting to be addressed. So I do have a resolution, but would like to take the opportunity to answer any questions that you have.
Blake, so we acquired the properties, and then when we realized that the Corps wasn't going to buy them from us, then we started offering them back to the owners. When did we stop doing that?
It was about the 2002 timeframe, I believe, is when we discontinued that. There's some, I guess, some other considerations there. The statutes on gratuitous gifting. Am I saying that correctly, Lorley? And lending of credit that does not allow us to. Of course, the property price has increased over the years, so it limits our ability to sell that property back at the price it was acquired for. So there's that complexity. So that was kind of at play in 2002.
Yeah, and I can speak to it a little bit. So the properties were acquired back in the 1950s to build a reservoir. There, a long time ago. We won't go into detail, but there was like the 6 Dam project that was looking at building a number of reservoirs between Possum Kingdom down to Lake Whitney. I think when Lake Whitney was built, it sort of put that on hold, but we had acquired a bunch of those properties here around Bee Mountain to build a reservoir. Now the Corps of Engineers, because building Lake Whitney, also acquired a bunch of easements from us across those properties as well. And then when eventually it was determined we weren't going to build the reservoir back in I think maybe in the early 60s, the board instituted sort of a program where they allowed people to come buy back the properties that we had sold, and that went on for about 40 years. In 2002, I think just due to the fact that there were just a bunch of old resolutions and so forth that were outstanding, that were constantly coming up before the board out of the blue, and nobody really realized what was out there. We decided that we needed to do sort of a clean slate start, and that's when we adopted our current, although it's been updated from time to time, operation policy manuals, where we went back through, we figured out what policies we're going to keep in place and which we weren't. And this is one of them that was not kept in place. And so at that point in time, we stopped offering for sale. I think in the interim, there were like 50, Sandra may be able to tell me, like 57 properties or so that were originally acquired. All but 19 of them were sold back by 2002. The last one sold was probably in the mid to late 90s, and before that, like back in the mid to early 80s. Most of them got sold back pretty early. So we still have 19 of them. Like he said, one of them, we'll get into that later. There's some negotiations. It's a special sort of situation. We'll talk about it at a future board meeting. But in general, at this point, like Blake said, we think that the best position for the BRA is to maintain these properties because they are so pristine. They offer an excellent opportunity for mitigation purposes and conservation and other properties. And what he was getting into with no gifting and so forth is, you may have heard that I think like maybe in 2011, a statute was passed that required, that allows that if a governmental entity has purchased property for a project and then they don't end up using it, then the owners can buy it back at the original price. But that wasn't in place. That wasn't the law at the time we purchased these. It wasn't even the law at the time we stopped the program that we had. And at this point in time, the BRA, even though we're not continuing the reservoir project, we are continuing, to hold on to those properties for a public purpose, and so we're not in a position that we could sell them back at the original price, anyways, just due to the state of the law right now in the state of Texas. So that's sort of what he was explaining. But if y'all have any questions, we'll be happy to.
Thank you, Riley and Blake. That's the history I was looking for.
Yes.
So the one-off is the that family that came in.
Yes.
To our previous meeting. Okay,
like I
just
said,
wanted-
we'll get into those details
Okay.
another time at a future board meeting. We're still in the process of talking to them. And they just had a very different situation than everybody else. So, but this actually affects their property too. I mean, this applies to all the properties, including theirs. So,
Very good. Any further questions, comments? You can read the resolution.
Be it hereby resolved that the Property Management Committee recommends to the Board of Directors of the Brazos River Authority adoption of the following proposed resolution. Whereas the Brazos River Authority owns properties along the Brazos River in Bosque, Johnson, and Somerville counties, upstream of Lake Whitney, otherwise known as the Bee Mountain properties, which were originally retained in the 1950s for the purpose of constructing a reservoir. Whereas the reservoir was not constructed, and for a period of approximately 40 years, the Brazos River Authority provided adjacent landowners the opportunity to repurchase these tracts. Whereas in 2002, after approximately 2/3 of the properties had been repurchased, the Brazos River Authority discontinued reselling the properties. Whereas after a reevaluation of the properties, it has been determined that retaining ownership and control of the Bee Mountain properties will serve to further the efforts of the Brazos River Authority to preserve and protect the natural resources of the Brazos River Basin, as the Bee Mountain properties provide a beneficial natural barrier for water quality protection benefits, stream bank stabilization, erosion control, and wildlife habitat. Further, these properties may also be utilized for potential future conservation opportunities to support the Brazos River Authority's mission and strategic goals. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Board of Directors of the Brazos River Authority hereby resolves to retain the Bee Mountain properties to support these efforts.
You've heard the reading of the resolution. Is there a motion to adopt?
So move.
Second.
We have a motion by Director Lloyd and seconded by Director Savage. Please poll the committee.
Chairwoman LaChance,
Yes.
Director Lattimore,
Yes.
Director Bourne,
Yes.
Director Savage,
Yes.
Director Wilson,
Yes.
Presiding Officer Flores,
Yes.
Director Huber,
Yes.
Director Lloyd.
Yes.
I'll entertain a motion to adjourn at this time.
So moved.
We have a second? All in favor?
Yes.
With no further business, this committee will adjourn the meeting at 9:52 a.m. Thank you very much, everyone.
Good job.